The next speaker is Stephen Bayley, who requires no introduction other than the one that he asked me to give for himself. International sex god, was it? I did ask. He's a world-renowned author, broadcaster, commentator, with Terence Conran, founded effectively the Design Museum. He's written in more publications from Condé Nast to the FT than most of us have read. He's been acknowledged by many institutions from the University of Wales, or I can't name them all. And what Stephen is going to do is to take what Charles has told us about our human condition, I hope, into how this is going to mean we react with each other, with the relationship with transport, etc. So over to you, Stephen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's one of the first occasions I've ever spoken when the audio-visual thing is actually working, and that's an added delight. I'm actually rather preoccupied by the idea of what the French call le monde à l'envers, the world turned upside down. I think all our assumptions about travel are probably about to be, or certainly mine are, about to be revised. I mean, several years ago, I took part in a Conservative Party conference, a debate about low-cost air travel. I mean, I don't define myself by politics, but generally speaking, I'm a sort of libertarian hedonist. That must be obvious. But I have an argument against low-cost travel, and my arguments, from the libertarian hedonist perspective, were based on the idea that about environmental concerns about increasing low-cost air travel. I don't just mean the obvious things about carbon and using up unrenewable resources, but we now know that the contrails which aeroplanes cause themselves, they create artificial cloud patterns which contribute in a way to global warming. But I'm also I'm more culturally concerned as well about how low-cost air travel actually destroys the destinations which it's meant to delight us with it. So I was actually at the Conservative Party conference, the libertarian hedonist, advocating self-denial, saying, no, it's marvellous perhaps that you can go to Prague for less than the price of a pizza, but maybe it's not a good idea. However, against me, and this is about the le monde à l'envers idea, was the delightful man called Simon Calder, who is the travel editor of The Independent. He's a lovely, lovely man, but and I'd say this if Simon was here now. Perhaps he is. Simon, are you? No. Simon is actually cartoon socialist. I mean, Simon actually wears sandals and socks, and he's a man. No, I'm not mocking it. He's absolutely a man of huge, old-fashioned Fabian principles. So here was me, the libertarian hedonist, saying self-denial. We must stop using low-cost travel because it's ruining the planet, destroying destinations. And Simon, the old-fashioned socialist, would say, "Oh no. It's all about consumer choice. It's about the price factor. It's about free markets." And I know you can't possibly stand in the way of this form of progress, Stephen. And, so what I'm going to say is here was Simon Calder, the advocate, the old-fashioned socialist, who's an advocate of low-cost air travel, and he was talking. He was saying, yes, we must all have unreflective self-indulgence if someone's prepared to subsidise our flight to Prague, and so we can go there for £9.90. We must do it. He was concerned with convenience. I was much more concerned with, in a rare moment of piety, I was much more concerned with principles. Of course, in front of a Conservative Party audience, where most of in Eastbourne or some Bournemouth or someone like that, where most of the audience had timeshares in Marbella. My argument, of course, that they all depended on EasyJet for them to extract maximum value out of their timeshare. My argument was like trying to shoot Bambi, and of course, I lost. But anyway, my point really is that I believe that the idea that travel is either a private pleasure or a business necessity is one of the great delusions of our age. And I think it's a delusion we're all, the alert amongst us are becoming acutely aware of. Henry Ford, the great motorcar entrepreneur, Henry Ford said in his fabulous autobiography, which was actually written by someone else, when it was Henry Ford's autobiography, My Life and Work, 1926, he said memorably, "I had to invent the gasoline buggy in order to escape from the crushing boredom of life on a Midwest farm." And that's a magnificent idea, and of course that's still what motivates people who are prepared to sit in traffic and suffocate and the rest of it. They're still motivated, as indeed I am. We all are, by that sort of that germ of that idea which Henry Ford recognised. You have a motor car, you are free. And if you've been to the Midwest, if you've sat in a building in Detroit and you look at the vast flatness and the possibility of these distant vistas, you can understand what Ford meant. But of course now, as we all know, the liberating machine, the gasoline buggy, which was guaranteed to take us away from boredom, has become oppressive. Today, most young people, of course, prefer a smartphone to a car. Mobility has become virtual. There was actually a large research exercise done in the United States last year which actually said that. They found that the majority of people under 30 would much rather give up their car than give up their smartphone. And incidentally, and part of the same research found that, a generation ago, when the same group was asked about what were the coolest brands, there was BMW and a Porsche and whatever in the top 20 cool brands. Last year, no car manufacturers appeared in the top 20 cool brands amongst this research in the United States about youthful mobility. During the first Gulf War I, perhaps you all recall, all unnecessary, as it was called, all unnecessary business travel was banned, and it had no effect on the world economy whatsoever. I actually take issue with Charles about why do global executives travel. I know a few global executives, they travel because they like being in the Gulf Stream. It's nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with meeting the staff. Anybody who's spent any time, and we all have, in an airport lounge, can sense, anybody's been there, it's 5:30 in the morning waiting for your flight to Frankfurt or Geneva, you can just look around, you can see, you just know how utterly nugatory the activity which is taking place is. Travel. You just look. No sensible outcome. Can come from this. The idea of sending human beings in pressurized tubes weighing 150 tons at 37,000 feet in order to meet other people who've done the same thing and meet in an airless hotel, the perimeter of Frankfurt Airport. This is just the craziest, most insane idea. But meanwhile, the study, look at the leisure travel as well. Look at the doleful, miserable, harrowed, harassed faces you see at Gatwick, Southern Terminal, at 4 o'clock at a weekend morning. No one can imagine. Just like Strindberg said, anybody who's heard the screams of a newborn infant or heard the death rattle of a dying man, no one could imagine that the period in between was meant to be enjoyed. That's rather a negative view of life, I grant you. But anybody who's been to Gatwick at 4 o'clock in the morning, as I have all too frequently, no one could surely imagine that the cultural, human, economic, philosophical, intellectual, practical benefits come from this activity. Meanwhile, my own personal belief is that Crossrail is going to be at immense cost to the convenience, amenity and aesthetics of London, incalculable cost for the past 5 years. Crossrail will actually be completed at precisely the historical moment when people decide it's totally useless to commute. The idea of sending, 80 kilograms of blood, bone and fat, from Maidenhead to the city in a fast train, which is ludicrous idea it is. Alas, I'm not a poet, but I've, for a long time, I had an opening line of a poem resonating in my head, and it goes something like this. It says, "The places I will never go," the list gets longer every day. I can hear this rhythm constantly repeating itself in my mind's ear, and it's absolutely clear. Travel is all about a bittersweet mixture of promise and disappointment, delight and dismay, and that's in this sense, I agree with Charles. Of course, curiosity is a part of it, but I think that, as I said, the sensitive among us are beginning to realise that the dismay is becoming larger than the delight. Tourism is utterly destructive. I can think of no positive benefits which have arisen out of the development of tourism. In the 19th century, John Ruskin, who represented the voice of the Victorian Imperium in those fabulous Old Testament tones, he sensed announced this. He wrote, Ruskin was mad, of course. Ruskin, like me, was once an art critic, and then he moved from art criticism to political economy, and then promptly went insane. Technically insane. I may be on the same path myself. I'll leave it to you to judge. But Ruskin was terribly concerned about the arrival of the new railway in the Lake District, and he wrote a response to there's a book called A Protest Against the Extension of the Railways in the Lake District, was published in 1876. And in this, this inspired Ruskin to the most extraordinary rhetorical inventive. He spoke about he said the stupid herds of modern tourists, and he thought that these same stupid herds of modern tourists would make the Lake District descend into hellish ugliness. This innocent railway, by the way, was just we all just by the by, we all now regard it as a picturesque delight, was intended to run from Windermere to Keswick. Ruskin saw it instead, and these words are marvellous here, as an enterprise conceived in a frenzy of avarice. His favourite landscapes are going to be blasted into a treeless waste of ashes, he said. Sheep will be driven from Helvellyn. All of Wales and Cumberland will be blown into a heap of slate and shingle. And all this simply to find. Anyway, that's by the by. What he actually said was ultimately was this, and this is often quoted about Ruskin on the railways. He said, what the new railway has to do is to shovel those who have come to Keswick to Windermere, and to shovel those who have come to Windermere back to Keswick. I'm afraid it was a ludicrous process which he identified then. Florence today is troubled by what the Florentine authorities call the maleducati, the poorly educated. That's a quite polite way of saying low-value tourism, and of course low-value tourism is another way of saying poor people. But what it is, sensitive visitors to Florence are now. Stendhal, the great travel writer Stendhal, who coined the word tourist. He wrote about his the glorious palpitations he felt when confronting great beauty in Florence, and he wrote about it so eloquently. An Italian psychologist 20-30 years ago took it up and described Stendhal's syndrome, that sort of extraordinary frisson of pleasure you get when you see a great building. But nowadays you go to Florence and does anybody? You see the ludicrous, destructive acts of tourism. People smearing ketchup and burger grease over the Casa Buonarroti. I'm a broad-minded, fundamentally liberal, it's not my libertarian hedonist thing. Person keen on education, and I'm passionate about architecture and the inspiration which art can speak. But no one who's been to Florence can possibly construe that any benefit comes from either to Florence itself as a city, or to the majority of visitors there. They say that travel broadens the mind, but I personally have a conviction that actually the opposite is true. As they say in Zen, whatever is true, the opposite is truer. I rather think that travel narrows the mind. It certainly does in my case. The more places I go to, the fewer I want to return to. And I'm on the whole more interested, I promised you there are no facts or science in what I'm saying. I'm just giving you a succession of beliefs and opinions. I'm personally much more interested in editing what I already know than adding more to my library. In particular, I was brought up with aeroplanes. My father used to work in the aircraft industry, and I was brought up a little bit with the romance of aeroplanes I used to get when I should have been doing something wholesome like playing football or drinking beer. At weekends, I was hoiked around aircraft factories looking at machine tools and aircraft bits and pieces, which is part of what inspired my interest in design. I'm obsessively interested in aeroplanes. I love them as objects. But the fact is that through mass travel, low-cost travel particularly, has completely drained the romance of flight of all its enchantment. I don't think there's any human activity apart from being in a hospital or a prison which is more demeaning and more unpleasant than actually going to an airport. And if anybody disagrees, does anybody disagree? No. The jet plane, like Henry Ford's gasoline buggy, the jet plane promised to democratize travel, democratize luxury. That, in principle, is a good thing. But what it has done instead is universalize mediocrity. It spread the jet plane, universal jet travel hasn't made the world a better place. It's actually spread suburbanism across the planet. Noel Coward, marvellously, was once asked about a flight he'd just had. And how was your flight, Sir Noel, somebody once said. And Noel Coward magnificently said, well, aeronautically speaking, it was a great success, but socially it left quite a lot to be desired. Anyway, yeah, my point, my feeling about flying and the dangers of flying, never mind questions like frontier integrity. I think there should be competitive tests and examinations for people moving from border to border. People should be tested for their decorum and taste before they're allowed to enter a foreign country. And I really mean it. I always think people should have at least PhD qualifications for entering central London as well, but that's a controversial idea. Anyway, the point about all transport systems, and Charles hinted at this before, and I think he's absolutely right. I mean, I love cars and planes and trains. I actually love the machinery and I love the idea of the romance. All transport systems are magnificent because they combine at the same time the humankind's absolute genius and its utter folly. All, they're all there. They're all there. I mean, the human imagination is completely larded, with absurdity. We have fantastic machinery used for the most utterly banal purposes. I mean, ask any traffic jam out there. I mean, you have the more sophisticated, the motor industry is getting more and more sophisticated, yet cars are getting less and less useful. Stand in any street corner in a provincial town and watch the morose faces of the people travelling past, and past the stoplights. What strange, melancholic vistas of escape are they contemplating? And the answer is, I don't know. All recreational travel is founded, right? Charles called it curiosity, but it's founded in the belief that authentic gratification of some sort, whether it's getting a tan, getting laid, getting seriously drunk or whatever it is, or having extra pina coladas, recreational travel is based on the idea that true, authentic gratification exists somewhere else. Travel is about desire. And desire is I'm trying to write a little book about desire at the moment. This is the thing on my mind. Desire is not the same as lust. Lust is easily dealt with. It's spontaneous and it's a spasm and it's comes and goes. Desire is more complicated because it's about longings and yearnings played out over time. Now, travel is like that, but it's also absurd. And business travel is, in a sense, exactly the same as recreational travel because it's based on a similar unreliable delusion that suggests that that true prosperity can only be attained by activities elsewhere and not at home. Desire, however, I don't abjure all this. I don't reject all this. Desire has been actually at the core of the design of motor vehicles. As I said, the motor vehicle, the car, which is still obviously the most familiar transport system we all know. Its very origins, back to Henry Ford and his gasoline buggy and removing us from boredom. It's always been about vistas of escape. After Henry Ford, there was a wonderful man in Detroit called Harley Earl, who just after Henry Ford had satisfied everybody's, by about 1926, everybody in the United States who could afford a car had bought a Model T Ford. Everybody had one. Desire was satisfied. The market was over. Then this extraordinary, and by the way, the idea about the wonderful thing I can't help passing on to an audience like this is that thing which they said about Henry Ford's famous thing, any colour as long as it's black. This was not aesthetic proscription by Henry Ford. It was something altogether different. Ford was so obsessed with economy and efficiency. In those days, they used to put the cars which had just been painted out in the sun to dry. And black paint dried much more quickly than any other colour. So Model T Fords were always black because they could shift them more quickly because the paint dried more quickly. Anyway, 1926, all Americans who could afford it were mobile with Model T Ford. Then a man called Harley Earl came along and he was a neighbour of Cecil B. DeMille in Hollywood. Harley Earl founded General Motors' Art and Colour section, as it was called. Later it became the styling division. And in 1926, Harley Earl had this absolute revelation, which defines the whole design idea of the 20th century. He said, if you added colour and interest to a car, maybe you could excite demand and curiosity. And that's what Harley Earl did. 1927, the whole idea of car styling began. And what Harley Earl said, when you get in a car, you should feel as though you're going on vacation for a while. And all that magnificent fantasy which Harley was responsible for, those amazing American cars in the 1950s, they're all about that. They're all about going on holiday. They're all about exciting the idea of travel. Never mind that anybody who's driven a American car of the 50s knows that they're abominable, insanitary death traps. But psychologically, they were magnificent because he captured that idea about movement. Transport, a motor car should transport you in mind as well as body, or so the theory went. It's a quaint, of course, but dated idea. But it also explains why, this year's latest transport fashion nonsense, Google's driverless car, it explains why Google's driverless car will never work. Because for as long as people want cars, they actually want to drive them. They want to be engaged in the curious, idiosyncratic idea of having sort of literally intercourse with a machine. Driving a car, one part of, I believe, of why we still enjoy, in a way, driving cars, because it allows all of us a total engagement with that primary 20th century experience, the modernist experience of grappling with the machine. But be that as it may, the idea that Google's driverless car represents some sort of transport option for the future strikes me as absolutely ludicrous. The flawlessness of a Google electronic pod, it just promises to encapsulate boredom. It's like alcohol-free lager. The cars are absurd, but they're fun because they're absurd. The economist John Maynard Keynes predicted that at about this moment now, the moment we're all sitting in, we would all be so prosperous that it would be the end of work. We'd be stopped working about now because we'd all have so much wealth we didn't need to generate any more. And as I said, Keynes was clearly wrong, I'm probably wrong too, but just as Keynes was predicting the end of work, I am predicting any minute now the end of travel. If you actually have a well-organised life, leaving home for a completely disenchanted airport, or to sit in a traffic jam, or a characterless, driverless car, if you have a well-organised life, doing such a thing isn't an invitation to glorious intellectual or cultural curiosity. It means a dramatic reduction in your standard of living. It was once that fortunate, privileged people travelled continuously. Now, as anybody's been to an airport or a railway station or a port anywhere in the world, knows it's actually only the dispossessed who travel continuously. Equally, like Freakonomics, rich people were once fat, rich people are now thin. Rich people, the travellers know, rich people used to travel with a lot of luggage. Now it's only poor people who travel with a lot of luggage. Why is it always me who finds in front of him somebody trying to take a fridge freezer on board in an airport check-in? The amount of baggage carried through an airport is an inverse indicator of prosperity, I always find. And I think, my fundamental belief, and I come to my conclusion, I'd be glad to say, the more sophisticated you are nowadays, the less you move about. I mentioned Noel Coward before, but Noel Coward had this wonderful refrain in one of his songs. Why do the wrong people travel when the right people stay back at home? Anyway, so in future you know where I'm going to be.